Do you want to know how I found out my son's wife was moving my grandchildren to another country and how I stopped it before the moving trucks ever showed up? It started with a text message that wasn't meant for me. One wrong tap, one misrouted thread, and I saw everything I was never supposed to see. My name is Dorothy Caldwell. I'm 63 years old. I spent 28 years on the federal bench in Charleston, South Carolina. I've heard testimony from murderers, from corporate thieves, from men who looked me in the eye and lied with the confidence of people who'd never been held accountable for a single day in their lives. I thought I'd seen every form of deception there was. I had not yet met my daughter-in-law's mother. Let me take you back to a Sunday morning in October, the kind of morning Charleston does better than anywhere else on earth. Low golden light, salt air coming off the harbor, the smell of biscuits and strong coffee filling my kitchen on Trad Street. I was sitting at the breakfast table with my reading glasses on, going through a brief for a consulting case, when my phone buzzed with what I thought was a message from my son Marcus. It wasn't. It was a forwarded screenshot, sent to the wrong number in a group thread. Renee, my daughter-in-law, had meant to send it to her mother Patricia. Instead, she sent it to me. By the time she realized the mistake, I'd already read every word. The screenshot was a conversation between Renee and a real estate agent in Edinburgh, Scotland. There were photos of a 4-bedroom house. There were school enrollment forms for 2 children ages 6 and 8. My grandchildren, Lily and James. The agent's message read, "Lease begins February 1st. Congratulations on the transfer. Your family is going to love it here." Below that, Renee had written to her mother. Marcus finally agreed. "Just don't say anything to Dorothy yet. She'll make it a whole thing, and we don't need that energy right now. We'll tell her after the holidays. By then it's already done." Her mother had replied with a single word and a smiley face. Smart. I set my phone down on the table very carefully, the way I used to set evidence folders down in my courtroom when the contents were so damning. I needed a moment before I spoke. My biscuits were getting cold. I didn't care. My son, Marcus Caldwell, 38 years old, environmental engineer, man I had raised alone from the age of 4 after his father left us for a woman half my age, had agreed to move my grandchildren 4,000 miles away. And the plan was to tell me after it was already done, after the holidays. By then, it's already done. I went to my study. I keep a legal pad on the left side of my desk, the same brand I used during my first year clerking for Judge Harriet Odom in 1987. I've written every consequential decision of my life on that yellow paper first. Divorce. Judicial appointments. The morning I told my oncologist I would not be doing a second round of chemo, and why. I sat down, picked up a pen, and I wrote 3 words at the top of the page. Not without me, not as a threat, as a decision. Because in my experience, the difference between a threat and a decision is simple. Threats depend on someone else's reaction. Decisions don't. I made my first call at 9 in the morning. My attorney, Franklin Dupree, who had been handling my affairs for 20 years and knew better than to answer with anything other than full attention when I called on a Sunday. "Franklin," I said, "I need to know exactly what legal standing I have as a grandparent in South Carolina if my son attempts to relocate my grandchildren internationally without my prior knowledge." The pause on his end told me he understood the weight of what I was asking. He didn't ask why, he asked when. I told him February 1st. He said he'd have a memo to me by Tuesday. Then he said, carefully, "Dorothy, whatever happened, don't do anything irreversible before we talk." I thanked him and hung up. My second call was to my financial advisor, a sharp woman named Colette Warren who had been managing my portfolio since I left the bench. I had been paying 1/3 of Marcus and Renee's mortgage for the past 3 years, not because they couldn't manage Marcus earned well, but because it was the house where Lily and James grew up, and I'd told myself I was investing in stability. Colette answered on the second ring. "Colette," I said, "please suspend the automatic transfer to the Caldwell household account, effective immediately." Another pause. Then, "Dorothy, is everything all right?" "Everything is clarifying," I said. "I'll explain later." My third call was the hardest one. I called my older sister, Vera, in Atlanta, because Vera is the only person in my life who has ever been unafraid to tell me when I'm wrong. She picked up immediately because she always does, and because she heard something in my voice before I said 10 words. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. I told her about the text. About Edinburgh. About February 1st. I read her Renee's message word for word. She'll make it a whole thing, and we don't need that energy right now. Vera was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm coming down Thursday. Don't talk to Marcus until I get there." "I'm not making any promises about Thursday," I said. Dorothy Marie Caldwell. "I'll try," I said, and hung up. I spent the next 2 days doing what I do better than almost anything else. Research. I pulled every document I'd ever signed in relation to Marcus and Renee's household. The mortgage contribution agreement, informal, no clause restricting relocation. A oversight I noted with the cold professionalism of a woman reviewing her own mistakes. Lily and James's school enrollment forms, which I had co-signed as emergency contact and secondary guardian. Birthday cards, emails, a handwritten note from Lily that said, "Grandma. I want to live by you forever," and was held to my refrigerator with a magnet from Myrtle Beach. I also called Renee's mother. Patricia Holloway answered on the 4th ring. She's a woman from Hilton Head with a vacation home in Asheville, and opinions about everything from thread counts to who should and should not be considered a proper grandmother. We had been polite to each other for 7 years, the way 2 countries with a disputed border are polite, carefully, with full awareness of where the lines are. "Dorothy," she said warmly. Too warmly. The way people speak when they know they've been caught and are hoping pleasantness will serve as cover. What a surprise. "I imagine it is," I said. "Patricia, I received a message on Sunday that was meant for you. I think you know what it contained." The warmth drained out. "Dorothy, I hope you understand that Marcus and Renee are adults who have the right to make decisions about their family, yes. To involve their children's grandmother only after the decision is irreversible, no. That's not a right. That's a strategy, and it's one I'd like to discuss directly with my son. I think," Patricia said carefully, "that you should let Marcus and Renee come to you in their own time." Their own time, I said, was apparently February. I've moved my timeline up. I called Marcus that evening. He answered on the 1st ring, which told me Renee had already told him about the misdirected message. His voice had a particular quality I recognized from his childhood, the voice he used when he'd done something he knew was wrong and had rehearsed an explanation that he hoped would be enough. "Mom," he said, "I was going to tell you. When? After the holidays. We just wanted to get through Thanksgiving and Christmas without..." "Without what, Marcus?" My voice was steady. I'd spent decades keeping my voice steady, in rooms where steadiness was the only power I had. "Without having to look me in the eye while you told me you were taking my grandchildren to another continent? It's not like that. It's a 2-year contract. A renewable 2-year contract. It's an incredible opportunity for our family. And where do I fall in that family? Silence. The particular silence of a grown man who doesn't have an answer and knows it. "You could visit," he said finally. "We'd fly you out. Twice a year. More if you want. Marcus." I stopped him, not with anger. With something quieter. I attended every single one of James's baseball games last spring. Every one. I sat with Lily every Tuesday afternoon for 2 years while she learned to read. I drove 40 minutes each way, twice a week. Because her teacher said she needed extra support and you and Renee were both working. I have been present for those children in every way a grandmother can be present. And your plan was to tell me when it was already done. I could hear him breathing. "The transfer on the mortgage has been suspended," I said. "As of Monday." "Mum, I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. Because clearly, you weren't going to." He came to my house the following evening. I made dinner, smothered pork chops, rice, the green beans, the way my mother used to make them with fatback and onion. Not to soften anything. I've just found that certain conversations need the anchor of food that knows who you are. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with college applications. where I'd told him his grandfather was gone, where we'd celebrated his first engineering contract with a bottle of wine and takeout because neither of us felt like cooking that night. I set a plate in front of him. Then I put my phone between us, and I played the screenshot conversation aloud, slowly, so the words had nowhere to hide. He didn't look at me while it played. He looked at his hands. When it was over, I said, "Tell me something honestly. Was this Renee's idea or yours?" It was a joint decision. That's not what I asked. He pressed his lips together. Renee found the position. She advocated for it. I agreed because he stopped. Because it felt like a chance to do something without asking for permission first. The room went very still. I set down my fork. "Permission," I said. "From me. Mom, you have a way of being the center of gravity in every room, in every decision. You co-signed the mortgage. You show up at every game, every recital. You have opinions about their pediatrician, their school curriculum, the way Renee handles discipline. And she's not wrong that sometimes it feels like he stopped again. Say it, like you're raising them instead of us." I sat with that for a long moment. 30 years on the bench teaches you that the truth almost always arrives sideways. You think you're trying one case, and the evidence reveals another one entirely. "Do you love your wife?" I asked. "Yes." "Do you love your children?" "More than anything." "Then why?" I said softly. "Didn't you just tell me that you needed more space? That you needed to feel like the parents and not the people I was supervising? Why did it have to become a secret and a moving truck?" He put his face in his hands. He looked like he was 12 years old. He has always, under stress, looked 12 years old to me. "Because every time I've tried to say something, you fix it," he said. "You don't fight back. You just solve the problem, and then I feel like a child who complained about nothing. I didn't know how to talk to you about this without losing." After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time. I thought about the word he had used. Permission. I thought about every time I had shown up unasked. Every time I had offered money or presents before it was requested. Every time I had solved a problem that wasn't mine to solve. I thought about the way I had built my entire professional life around never needing anyone, never being dependent, never being the person in the room who required rescue. And I thought about whether, in raising Marcus the same way, I had given him a mother, or a standard he could never meet. My phone rang. Vera, calling 2 days early. "I heard from Marcus," she said without preamble. "Of course you did. He's not entirely wrong, Dot. I didn't say anything. You have been the center of gravity," Vera said. "And gravity is wonderful until you realize nothing can orbit you forever without burning out." I was trying to be present. "I know. But there's a line between present and everywhere. And baby sister? Sometimes you crossed it." I didn't sleep that night either. Not because I was devastated, because I was honest enough with myself eventually, in the dark, where there's no audience, and no bench, and no robe to admit that what Marcus had said about permission was at least partially true. I had never made him ask for it explicitly, but I had arranged things so that my approval was always the final weight on the scale. 2 days later, I had lunch with Franklin. He slid a memo across the table at our usual restaurant on Broad Street. And I read it the way I read every legal document completely, twice, without expression. "You have standing," he said. Particularly given the school co-enrollment forms and the consistent documented presence in the children's lives. If Marcus attempted to relocate internationally without formal notification or mediation, you could seek a grandparent visitation order that would travel with the children. "Could?" I said. "The question is whether you want to." I looked out the window at the street. An older woman was walking a small dog. 2 children were running ahead of her, and she was watching them with the particular expression of someone who has learned that the best thing you can do is let them run and simply stay close enough to catch them if they fall. "What I want," I said slowly, "is not to be erased. What I want is to be honest with my son about what I've been doing wrong. What I want is for those children to grow up knowing their grandmother. But Franklin, I don't want to use the courts to hold my family hostage. That's not protection. That's the same thing Renee's mother was doing from the other side. He nodded. He didn't look surprised. So, what do you want to do? He asked. I want to have the conversation I should have had years ago, I said. All of us in the same room. I called Marcus that evening. I told him I wanted to meet. All four of us. Him, Renee, me, no Patricia, no attorneys, no performance. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, When? Saturday, I said. My house. I'll cook. Renee arrived looking like a woman prepared for a fight she wasn't sure she could win. She is a compact, precise person. An architect. Meticulous in all things. The kind of woman who irons her linen in a particular direction. We had never been warm with each other, but we had been careful. Careful had run out. We sat in my living room, not the kitchen. The living room felt more honest, somehow. Less like feeding people into softness. More like a meeting between parties who needed to see each other clearly. I'm going to say some things, I began, and I want you both to hear them without interrupting, and then we're going to talk. The way adults talk. Not the way we've been managing each other. They both nodded. I found out about Edinburgh by accident. That is something I'm going to set aside for now, because the how is less important than the why. The why, the reason you felt you had to wait until I couldn't do anything about it, that is something I need to understand. And I think I'm beginning to... I looked at Renee. I have been in your marriage in ways that weren't invited. I have shown up to your children's lives so completely that I left no room for you to feel like the primary parent. I told myself I was helping. I did not ask if you wanted the kind of help I was offering. Renee blinked. She had clearly not expected this opening. That wasn't right, I said. I am saying clearly, to both of you, that I am sorry for the ways I made you feel supervised instead of supported. Marcus looked at the floor. Renee looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something between relief and wariness. The look of a person who has been tense for so long that relaxing feels like a trap. With that said, I continued, I need you to understand what was taken from me when you decided the plan was to tell me after the moving trucks were loaded. I need you to understand that I am not a peripheral character in those children's lives who can be managed and relocated and notified after the fact. I am their grandmother. I have shown up imperfectly, but I have shown up. That deserves honesty. I didn't want to fight, Renee said. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge under it. Every time I've tried to set a boundary with you, it turns into a conversation about what I'm doing wrong as a mother. Then I owe you a different kind of conversation, I said. But Renee, hiding a relocation is not a boundary. It's a disappearance. And those are two very different things. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My mother told me to handle it this way. Marcus looked at her. She didn't look back at him. She said if I told you ahead of time, you'd use the mortgage, the legal connections, everything to block us. She said the only way to protect our family was to present it as a done deal. I thought about Patricia Holloway on the phone. Let Marcus and Renee come to you in their own time. A woman managing the narrative before anyone realized there was a story being told. Your mother was afraid of me, I said. She was protecting us. She was protecting her access to your family by eliminating mine, I said. Not harshly, just truthfully. I know what that looks like, Renee. I spent 3 decades watching people justify control by calling it protection. The room was very quiet. Is Edinburgh what you actually want? I asked. Both of them. Not what the contract offers. Not what your mother thinks is a clean solution. What do you want? Marcus looked at Renee. She looked at him. Something passed between them that I recognized from 38 years of watching people in courtrooms, the look of 2 people deciding whether to tell the truth in front of a witness. I want the job, Renee said finally. But I don't want Lily and James growing up without knowing you. Then let's talk about what that actually looks like, I said. Not your mother's version, not mine. We talked for 3 hours. I made tea twice. Marcus ate half a plate of the cookies I'd put out, and then looked mildly embarrassed about it the way he's been doing since he was 9. Renee cried once, briefly. When she talked about feeling like a guest in her own family, I sat with that without fixing it, which might have been the hardest thing I did that afternoon. By the end, we had not resolved everything. You don't resolve everything in one afternoon when the weight has been building for years. But we had agreed on several things that were written down on my legal pad, which I read back to both of them before they left. Marcus and Renee would take the Edinburgh position. 2 years. Potentially renewable, but evaluated honestly at the end of the term. I would not use legal mechanisms to challenge the relocation. In exchange, I would have scheduled video calls with Lily and James twice a week. Not surprise drop-ins, not constant contact, but consistent presence. I would visit twice a year, trips planned in advance with real input from all of us about timing, and I would begin, formally and in writing, stepping back from the mortgage contribution not as punishment, but because it was time for them to fully own their own home. Renee asked quietly as she was putting on her coat if I was angry with her mother. I considered the question the way I'd considered thousands of questions that deserved honest answers instead of comfortable ones. I don't have room to be angry with Patricia, I said. She did what she thought she had to do to protect her daughter. I understand that impulse more than almost any other. I paused, but I'd like the chance to talk to her at some point, not to settle scores. Because I think 2 women who've both spent their lives fighting to hold their families together might have more to say to each other than either of us has managed. Renee nodded. She didn't make promises. I respected that. After they left, I called Vera. How did it go? She asked. Better than it should have, I said. Worse than I wanted. That's usually what honest looks like, she said. I told her about the agreement. About Edinburgh. About Renee's 3 hours of careful, difficult truth. She listened the way she always has, fully, without interrupting, without rushing to conclusion. She said finally. Are you going to be all right? I walked to my back window. The harbor was doing what the harbor does in October, turning silver and dark in the fading light, moving the way things move when they have no interest in being still. I have looked at that water for 40 years, and it has never once asked my permission to change. I'm going to be different, I said. Whether that's all right? I suppose I'll find out. Marcus called me the night before they flew out to Edinburgh in January to tell me that Lily had made him promise she could call me the first morning she woke up in Scotland. He said she'd made him write it on his hand with a marker so he wouldn't forget. She's got your stubbornness, he said. She's got yours, I told him. You just forgot where you got it. He laughed. I did not hear from Patricia Holloway for several weeks. When she finally called, it was a Thursday afternoon in February, 2 weeks after Marcus and Renee's family had settled into the Edinburgh house I'd seen only in screenshots on a misdirected text message. Her voice was different than it had been on any of the calls before. Not warm exactly, but stripped of the careful social performance she usually maintained like a coat of paint over old wood. I owe you an apology, she said. You do, I agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My daughter has spent her entire life doing what I told her was strategically correct. And it worked. Until it didn't. I think maybe I taught her to manage people instead of talk to them. A pause. I think I might have taught her that from watching me. I sat back in my chair. I taught my son that solving every problem was the same as loving someone, I said. And it worked. Until it didn't. We were both quiet for a moment. 2 women in their 60s, on opposite ends of a phone call, sitting with the particular exhaustion of people who have been very good at something that turned out to cause harm. The children look happy in the photos Renee has been sending, Patricia said finally. James has apparently decided he wants to play football, I said. The European kind. Lord, Patricia said. And something in her voice loosened into what might have been actual amusement. We did not become friends that afternoon, but we became something more useful to people who had agreed, without saying so directly, that the generation above us had made mistakes that were still being paid for, and that neither of us wanted to be the reason the next generation repeated them. The first video call with Lily came through on a Tuesday morning, 7:30 her time, 2:30 mine. She was wearing her school uniform, navy and white, and she held up her lunchbox to show me what Renee had packed, because apparently in Edinburgh they eat something called a piece, which is just a sandwich, and Lily thought I needed to know this immediately. I told her I would look it up. She said, "Grandma Dot, do you think Edinburgh has a harbor?" I told her every great city had a harbor of some kind. "Good," she said, with the certainty of a 6-year-old who has made up her mind. "Then when you come visit, we can show you." James waved from the background without looking up from whatever he was drawing. The normalcy of it, the ordinary, unremarkable fact of 2 children who knew I was there, who had grown up with my number in their phones and my voice in their weekly rhythms, hit me somewhere below the level of language. Not as a victory, not as vindication, just as the simplest possible version of what I had actually been fighting for. Presence. That's all. The right to remain present. 6 months after they left, Marcus called me on a Sunday morning. His voice had something in it I hadn't heard in years, not the careful, edited tone of a son managing his mother, but something younger and less armored. "Mom," he said, "Renee is pregnant." I set down my coffee. I felt my chest do something that had no good word for it in English. An expansion. A kind of warmth that starts somewhere central and moves outward. How far along? 11 weeks. We wanted to make sure before we told anyone. How was she feeling? Terrified. Excited. She wants to talk to you about, he paused. About what it was like to do it without her mother nearby. I thought about all the things I could say. About the 3 months I'd spent pregnant and alone in my mother's house after Marcus's father left. About what it is to become a mother when you are still figuring out who you are. About what I wished someone had told me and what I learned only by falling down. "Tell her to call me whenever she wants," I said. "Not on a schedule. Whenever she needs to." "You sure? I know you have the calls with the kids Tuesday and Friday and your consulting work. And, Marcus," I said gently, "I'm sure." After we hung up, I went out to my back steps and sat in the October sun. It was October again by then, 1 full year since that Sunday morning. With the misdirected text, and the cold biscuits, and the 3 words I'd written on yellow paper, I had a cup of coffee and I watched the harbor move. And I thought about what I would write in my notebook. If I opened it right now, I thought I would write something about presence, about how it is not the same as control, and how for most of my adult life I had confused one for the other. I thought I might write something about my sister Vera, and about the particular grace of people who love you enough to tell you the truth without softening it to the point where it stops being useful. I thought I might write that I had spent 30 years on a federal bench making certain that people were held accountable, that truth was established, that the record reflected what actually happened, and that the hardest thing I had ever been asked to account for was not the case of a corporation that had poisoned a river, not the sentencing memo that had taken me 3 weeks to write, but the simple, plain-spoken question my son had put to me across my own kitchen table. "Did you ever consider that maybe you were raising us instead of them?" I had considered it. I was still considering it. Consideration is not the same as resolution, and resolution is not always the same as peace. But this, the son on the harbor, a daughter-in-law pregnant and willing to call me without a schedule, a granddaughter who wanted to show me Edinburgh's waterfront, this was something, not the life I had planned, not the geography I had imagined, not the version where everyone stayed close and the family fit inside the radius of my knowing, just the real version, the one that turned out to be worth having, precisely because it had been honest enough to break first. I opened my notebook to a fresh page. I wrote slowly. In the cursive my grandmother taught me when I was Lily's age, the family I thought I was protecting didn't need my protection. It needed my trust. And trust, it turns out, is the one thing money cannot suspend, attorneys cannot draft, and a federal judge cannot order. You give it, or you don't. I'm giving it. Starting today. I closed the notebook and finished my coffee. The harbor kept moving. Somewhere in Edinburgh, my grandchildren were learning to pronounce peace correctly, were wearing navy and white, were growing up in a life that hadn't consulted me first. I had never been more grateful for anything in my life.